A letter to my upper-class white friends and to my teenage self. I wrote this letter about a year ago, and at that moment, I did not think I would share it in any public way, beyond the 10 close friends I wrote it to. Writing this letter was an extremely painful and personal process. It's about my experience as a brown refugee girl growing up in the Netherlands. This is my experience, and every single one of us has her own story. And please do not feel offended by my pain. You might encounter some anger in this letter, but healing is a process, and anger is an inevitable part of that. First of all, I want to start this letter with saying, I love you. I love all of you. Second, I don't think I've ever felt this alone in my life, and yet I decide to not reach out to you. Lately, I've been looking around whenever we would go somewhere, a party, a lecture, and I'd count how many people of color I see. One, and that was me. Although I got uncomfortable with what my own eyes were seeing, I couldn't help but notice. I also noticed my behavior, the way I speak, the things I speak about. And I started realizing more and more that my behavior resembled yours. But it wasn't me. It was never accepted by myself or by society. I am not an upper-class white person with a family and a home base. I am a brown, lower-class war refugee with a traumatized Muslim family who happened to be at your university. We got along, so we decided to be friends, and at that time, I was even unaware of all the trauma I carried inside. I was too busy trying to be embraced by an upper-class white community. So I finally would feel accepted and belong somewhere. Accepted by a society I thought would never embrace me. Its people are too good for me, too well-mannered, too intellectual. People that could have actual conversations with their parents. People who went to museums and talked art. That had traveled the world and clearly knew what they were talking about. People that were white and upper class. My entire existence at high school, I realize now, how much I hated myself. I hated my mother for being Afghan and raising me the way she did. I hated my father for leaving us when I was only so little. And I envied you and your seemingly perfect life. Although we had not yet met, in my subconscious mind, we had met. You were that blonde girl that played hockey in high school, whom I wanted to befriend so badly, even when you laughed at me when I took out my mom's food during lunch. I started eating in secret, trying to hide the smell, desperately hoping that maybe then you would want to be friends with me, and I could be a part of the pretty white girl group. So when you would talk about smelly Moroccans, I would laugh along. When you made jokes about bombs in my bag or bra, I'd laugh louder than all the white people in the crowd. I would feel ashamed when my classmates made fun of immigrants shopping at Aldi and try so hard to hide that my family did so too. I would sell myself and other immigrants for the tiniest acknowledgement of white people. Because whenever I looked around, all I saw was white people being pretty and getting attention. Every TV show and news channel, All advertisements, and definitely all the popular people at school. None of them looked like me. They were all white. So I dyed my hair blonde and put in blue contacts in the hope that people would find me pretty now, like a Dutch girl. Non-acceptance was an underlying truth of society for me, a truth that started settling and that turned into a hate that I internalized. When one doesn't feel accepted by society, the importance of a home base is vital. Unfortunately, in my case, my home was a conflicting mess. My mother, a young Afghan woman, brought up in a warm but conservative household, tried to raise her daughters in the same way. She was surrounded by a strange culture that opposed everything she embodied. All she had left was us. So my mother had no way to understand my struggle of seeking acknowledgement in a white society. But I wasn't able to see the beauty of our own culture because she was strangling me with it. I would fight my mother every single day for not being a liberal Dutch mom, for not giving me the freedom that all the white people at my school had, for not letting me go to parties or allowing me to wear shorts, for being the reason that I was not accepted in a white, anti-Muslim world. My mom's fears were justified. Years later, she turned out to be right. Desperate for acceptance by a culture that is not mine, a people that I don't come from, I hurt myself. I gave up on myself to be you. Soon enough, Afghan families forbid their daughters to hang out with me. I was one of the lost ones. And they feared that I would also influence their children, as if I were a cancer that could multiply. And my mother's friends stopped calling her. During our fights, I felt so at lost. I would sit behind my door and cry as I felt my heart being pulled out of my chest. My mother, she was crying too. She had nothing to live for anymore. She'd already lost her husband, her parents at such a young age. Lived through a war, was so far removed from her home, her family, her culture, and now her precious daughters. The only thing she has left in her life, the only reason she had fled her country, were turning against her. Rejected by white society, rejected by the Afghan community, rejected by my own mother, I fled. Enraged and conflicted, I fled from everything. And it was only after this that we met. Up to that point, our paths had never crossed, and your life had nothing in common with mine. So when I entered the university gates for the first time, I ignored that part of me. Because society had taught me how important it is to blend in. And I started adapting once again. An instinctual survival tactic to be accepted by other humans, I guess. Although I always felt less than you in the back of my mind. Always assuming that men would fall for you, the white girls. I accepted my place, and I was happy that at least two of you could dance. I started discussing real social issues as a form of intellectual masturbation, like you do. Pretending to be an educated academic, pretending that these issues were not about my own family. I started talking about my culture from your perspective, using words like exotic and oriental. I started fetishizing people of color, men of color, like you do. I started fetishizing ethnic clothing and customs, like you do. "25 years later, I look in the mirror and I see that I am not you. I scratch my skin and it doesn't turn white. I call my mother, she still has an accent. I look at you and all I see is white. I look at you and all I see is upper class. I look at you and all I see is a person with a family, a home base, a person who was never rejected by society, who never struggled with her self-worth in a white world. I look at you and all I see is how much I hate myself. And I hate you for that. I hate you for not having lived the rejections that I have lived. I hate you for making me feel too dramatic when I am emotional, because brown emotions are stereotyped as explosive. I hate you because your life has turned you into the person that you are, and my life has turned me into me, scarred, scared, and anxious too often. I hate you for befriending me. I hate you because our friendship made me feel accepted in a world that treats my people as exotic objects. I hate you because our friendship made me fall in love with you and lose myself. I hate you because I turned into you. But your reality is not my reality. Your identity had an outline. My world does not exist. My outline has been erased by people like you. People who claim they don't see color. It's been erased by the Afghan community when they took the right to define what it meant to be Afghan and did not consider me worthy of that definition. So I've been behaving in ways to not make any of us uncomfortable about what I actually am. Nothingness, a conflict, something misunderstood, a culture I don't even know myself, a country I have never lived. And then the jarring realization that white people live in such a different temporality. It's easy to say that human beings are equal when you have never lived in equality. As easily, your European ancestors colonized the concept of race. Its grandchildren can erase its conception at their own convenience. When being a racist is no longer accepted in society, we can simply choose to erase it ever existed. So now we can accept brown people, as long as we behave white enough. Please understand, when I'm mad at the world and us in it. I'm not mad at you as my friend. I'm mad at you as an upper-class white kid that can only learn about racism and classism secondhand because you have the privilege to never experience it firsthand. Although your blame is innocence, you have been protected by society, and I am still mad. Because it's unfair. It's unfair that these differences have worked in your benefit. And I want you to acknowledge that. and accept my pain, accept my madness. The burden of color was not a burden I chose for. It was a burden I was born with and confronted with every day of my life. A burden I carry close to me now. A burden that's become a part of my identity. In the same way, the burden of white was not a burden you chose for. And now, I am challenging you to live with your burden.